Namaste, everyone. Welcome to episode 8 of the Bharatvarta podcast. In episode 4, we briefly touched upon the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on global markets, the economy, and so on. There was a lot of interest on that, and we felt there was a need to do a follow up. So, in this episode, we will cover the continuing impact of COVID-19 on global markets, what we expect will happen in the days to come, and so on. Right. Uh, so, without further ado, let me introduce our guest today. So, we have Harsh Gupta, who's a public markets investor, an outspoken voice on politics and policy. And he's also one of those few people who can ground his economics in politics and culture that makes his ideas incredibly interesting. Hi, Harsh. How's it going?
Hi, thank you so much for the kind words. Going fine.
Yeah, and this time, obviously, you're going to laugh on cue, right?
Absolutely. Ha ha ha.
Wow, we're off to a good start already. uh, Next, we have Bodhisattva, who is an economist and author. He's been following COVID-19 very closely, all of the numbers related to that, right? Aside from calling BS on many of his economist peers, he has sort of a close affiliation to Pakistani music and, shall we say, culture. So, what's up, Bodhi? You want to elaborate more on that cultural affiliation?
No comments on my side. Hi, Carrie.
We'll
Hope
save
you're
that
doing
for
well.
a. Thank you. We'll save that for another episode. Yeah. Okay. And last but not the least, we have Ashish Chandorkar, who is a consultant, a public policy expert, Poha lover, and a Bharatvarta veteran. Ashish, which of those are you most proud of? You can be honest.
Definitely the Poha lover part.
The Poha lover, right? So, and
Absolutely.
right after would be Bharatvarta veteran.
Yes, indeed.
All right, guys. So let's get started. So I'm going to begin by reading a few headlines from across the world, and just to set context, right? Uh, Coronavirus recession looms. Its course unrecognizable. That is Nelson Schwartz writing for the New York Times. Analysts slash GDP estimates as coronavirus ripples through the economy. That's in the Wall Street Journal. And closer home, we have Economic Times, which says Modi's stay at home call may deepen India's economic slowdown. Okay, so I'm going to start with that. Ashish, are you surprised at all by that Economic Times heading? I know Sri Thiruvantai or T3 on Twitter is an economist that we both of us follow. And he had posted something similar about India's informal, services-driven economy being affected, more by a lockdown than the virus itself. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Carrie, I completely agree with that situation, and it's a very unfortunate trade-off for any government right now, be it in the center or in specific states. Indian economy, half of the economy, more than that, is services-driven. People do not have the luxury of working from home in many cases. And another challenge in India is that actually there are two challenges. One is that India has always been a gig economy where people have used their skills or trade craft to earn a living. Also, bulk of this part is informal in nature, where people are not really in registered jobs, or they don't get monthly salary, or they're not, in some cases, not even registered for getting benefits from the government, right? So the challenge is that when things shut down for prolonged periods, these people will be the first impacted, and then several of these people also live from one gig to another gig. They don't have a lot of savings. The daily wagers, the agriculture laborer, they only get paid when they show up. They don't get paid for sitting home. So this is a major challenge which India will face. Now, as I said, it's a very dramatic trade-off, because on the other side, if you don't shut down the cities, and which are like the engines of Indian economy, the challenge with that is that if the disease spreads very rapidly, it will put humongous pressure on the healthcare system. I mean, right now India still in the very early stages of the exponential growth curve. We are probably, as of today morning, we have got about 327 cases diagnosed. Some of them have also got cured, which is good news. But the challenge is that the situation can only go worse from here, and that's the last 2 days of the growth rates have kind of alluded to that already. So now, if India wouldn't shut down at this point of time, then we then risk a severe impact on the healthcare system. This is actually not a India-specific problem, by the way, in the sense that the economic consequences are already here. If you read the commentary, Goldman Sachs is saying that the US GDP will shrink by 20-24% this year. I think all their banks, I think Deutsche Bank, Bank of America had a slightly lesser impact number, about 12-13%. Chetan Ahya of Morgan Stanley is saying that the world economy will shrink. Well, world GDP growth will be 0.9% this year, given that the disease impacts pretty much every country globally. India has a bigger issue because of the structure of the economy, and I think in the coming days, like let's say more than a week, if the shutdown continues in cities like Mumbai, Delhi, Bangalore, Pune, it's going to cause other types of problems, which like civil unrest and people coming onto roads or protesting. I mean, all of that is very much possible after a week, 10 days. So it's a difficult situation to deal with for the state and the central governments.
Yeah, so one of the things that Rajiv Mantri mentioned on a previous broadcast was that India's systems or healthcare is already stressed, right? So compared to the US or Europe, for example, I mean, we are sort of better prepared because this is BAU for us, right? So I want to delve a little deeper on India's response. So we have about 300 plus confirmed cases at this point of time and are likely behind the curve. So largely the measures have been in sort of proactively monitoring people's entry and movement from foreign countries. But there are many who argue that we should ramp up, for instance, on testing capabilities, that, the central government should announce some kind of a dole to, assuage concerns of, let's say, a recession and so on, right? So Harsh, I want to switch to you. So are you happy with what has been done thus far? What would you want the government to do at this point?
So Kerry, on the testing side, I'm not an expert, so I have very little to add of substance there. In terms of what has been done, what can be done, both on the restrictions and on the economy side, I can perhaps add a bit more. So, for example, last 2 weeks or so, I don't know, approximately 300,000 people have landed in India, mostly Indian citizens, back to India on various flights from abroad. And yes, it was physically impossible to perhaps forcibly quarantine all of them. But I think between that and just a voluntary self-quarantine of 14 days was also the other extreme. So perhaps you could have been more innovative there. I really don't know. I mean, given that we are a democracy and we have all kinds of civil liberties and privacy issues, and honestly, the whole panic has only peaked recently. But maybe there could have been some identifying mechanisms for these people. I mean, without going into details, the government can track phones if it wants to, for example. And there could have been a more proactive response in terms of making sure these 300,000 people do not move around a lot if they have promised to self-quarantine. So I don't know whether that was fully done and how much of that is the central government or the state government. In terms of going forward, otherwise I must say that we've been very, very proactive compared to many other countries, and the number of cases was in the double digits till fairly recently, and we announced all these measures for the next 1 week. At least all international flights are off. All the most of the foreign visas that India has granted has been cancelled. Tourist visas, except business visas, they have been cancelled. Now, on the economic side, I absolutely think that there is a need of some kind of dole, as you mentioned, or cash transfers, because as both T3 and Ashish just mentioned, right? I mean, India has been a gig economy before the word became famous. There's a lot of small entrepreneurship, or rather forced entrepreneurship, in India, and a lot of people will have severe cash flow problems. as this kind of lockdown cascades through various parts of the economy. So the first to be hit were obviously the most obvious: tourism, travel, the people going out and spending on food, etc., etc. And then these people who used to earn X amount of money will therefore not spend on some other things. Um, so this is both pros and cons, right? In the pros are that perhaps Indians have historically never relied on the state for a rainy day. So perhaps in terms of basic savings as a percentage of their income, not in absolute amounts, we actually might be a bit better off than many Western countries if you compare the poorest decile here to the poorest deciles there. On the other hand, because we are not a big business run kind of economy, therefore, this idea that Ashish also mentioned, just you can announce half of your people to work from home and you can triage and alternate and so on and so forth, that really cannot be in any meaningful sense done in India. So, what we do need is giving instant cash to as many segments of our population as possible. Now, here there are a couple of issues, right? First, fortunately, we do have the JAM, the JAM Trinity infrastructure in place, the Jan Dhan accounts, which includes the poorest people. Everybody has an Aadhaar or a unique ID, and almost all adults in India have either a smartphone or a feature phone, right, which connects to it through the Aadhaar, through SMSs, and so on and so forth. So, if we want, we can actually start, giving say about 2,000 rupees per family for the next 4 months, and it comes to about slightly more than 1% of GDP. So, if you give 8,000 rupees to about 30 crore families in the next 4 months, that's 2.4 lakh crores, $32 billion. That is something that can be done. You can tweak it a bit. Then at the state level, Delhi government, some other governments have already announced increased PDS transfers. So that's good because not everything can be solved through cash. We need in-kind transfers as well. And the more targeted transfers, the programs are already in place. So perhaps the cash transfer will have to subsume PM Kisan. But other schemes such as various pension schemes, Atal Pension Yojana, various other kind of schemes, especially that help and target women, could perhaps be increased in the coming days. So I think we need really a hands-on effort, or we need efforts, or we need to delay taxes, we need to delay EMIs by 3 months in a way that does not cause any NPAs on the books of banks and NBFCs. That can be done. The US, for example, has said, tax day will come 3 months hence and not now. So that allows. See, the issue is, even the many businesses that are larger, they are often high volume and low margin businesses. So if you cannot lay off all of your employees or even some of your employees, but your revenue suddenly stops, your working capital needs shoot and you need cash to keep the operations going. So realistically, what most people are going to do is they're simply going to delay the wage payments of their employees or force them to take an unpaid leave. Both of them are unsatisfactory responses. So, but they'll have to do it unless the government steps in. And therefore, I think just mere kind of requesting or kind of morally trying to persuade businesses to make sure all of their employees are on a paid leave kind of system and the salary goes out on time, I'm afraid, except for a few large Indian multinationals, that's not realistic right now. So the government will have to come in with more. SBI, I think, announced easing of business overdraft lines. We need more banks to do that. And for private banks to do that, we need the RBI to step in, and we need RBI to reduce various bank weights, reduce various reserve requirements, however temporarily. And OMOs have begun on the RBI. RBI side is the open market operations, which is basically buying bonds, government bonds, to reduce mid-tenure interest rates, and that started after many months. It was first 10,000 crores, it's now 30,000 crores for the rest of this month. It needs to go to 100,000 crores at least for April. So I think the government is going to come out with a response, but it definitely, compared to other countries, has seemed a bit slower on the economic side, whereas it has not been slow on the public health side. So that dissonance is definitely a bit strange as of now. I mean, we could be happily wrong early this week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think taking a moralistic stance and sort of bullying businesses into, not doing something economically sensible is a sustainable solution for sure, right? But I do want to ask though, I mean, do you think that there'll be a government-enforced lockdown?
Oh, I think what we are seeing today, this Janta curfew, is basically a dry run for that. It is, it's Narendra Modi is perhaps the most impressive politician of our times, perhaps across the world. I would say he understands public psychology more than anybody else. So there is a sense to want the people to have a buy-in. It's almost as if the people have come up with this idea and they'll be celebrating it, half a day, a bit later than halfway, by at 5 o'clock, by making all these sounds and noises and shunks. So there is a certain amount of festivity added to otherwise morbid atmosphere. And this is nothing but a dry run, so the people know that, okay, this is how we live, and the basic utilities like your kirana dukan and all that will be open. But let's get used to that and let's see how it goes. So I think a lockdown is definitely required. I think a lockdown is coming as well. And I think today is a dry run for that. Now, I'm not sure whether it starts tomorrow, day after tomorrow, or a week later. I'm not sure about that. But I think a lockdown is definitely on the way.
So let's talk about the rate of infection itself. There was Dr. Ramanan Lakshminarayan yesterday who said that India could be looking at 300 million COVID-19 infections. Now, Bodhi, do you agree with that, or do you think that there will be some kind of a moratorium on economists and bad math?
So I'll come to that point, but just to add to what Ashish just was saying, that about the whole idea of a lockdown or forced lockdown. I think we are already in one, and several states have already announced that they are going to be locking down not just non-essential services but basically all businesses, barring a very few essential services, right? So in case of Mumbai, they've already indicated that you're not going to have train services being available to anyone who's not deemed as essential. So in a way, I think India is effectively closed for the next 2 weeks, with the exception of markets, and that's going to be painful for some of our friends as things are. Now, on the whole idea of whether economists should take a moratorium, I think so I tweeted about this yesterday. On my return to the forum, is that economists in these kind of situations, now there's obviously a popular joke that economists have successfully predicted 10 out of the last 5 recessions. I think economists have probably had a even better track record of getting it 100% wrong as far as doomsday predictions are concerned, right? I mean, Malthus being the most famous one, where he had said that we'll run out of food given on account of higher population growth. Now, coming back closer home to Dr. Lakshminarayan, I think he does have some credentials, being a public health expert, but then again, he is not in a position to really gauge what's going on. As far as I don't think he has any special insight into the way India has approached it. And I'm not surprised, like many other Western publications, including The Time, the New York Times, Washington Post, there's a lot of fear-mongering and there's a lot of ignorance about India's response. I mean, if you follow what, say, Ashish has been writing on his Twitter handle for the last 2 months, I mean, India has been on top of the situation since the end of January, right? So effectively, when China had its big scare, India has been kind of responding to it, and we have done reasonably okay. Having said that, we have seen a bit of a spike up in the last 5-6 days in the number of cases, and I think this is something that is probably going to start gaining a bit more attention to. So put things in context. We had our 100th case of COVID-19 on 15th of March, and since then we doubled the number of case count within 5 days on the 20th, and we have had almost a doubling of the case. I wouldn't be surprised if we double it to 400 by today, right? So while it's not moving at the same pace as it has in, say, places like US or Iran or Italy, which are above that trend line of 33% daily increase, India is somewhere slightly below that. But then, even with the current pace, you could easily be close to about 6,000 to 7,000 cases by the end of March, which is quite a significant, almost a 20-time increase in terms of in terms of where we are. So, I think the lockdown in India is probably, hopefully, coming at the right time, where we'll be able to flatten the peak out and reduce the pressure on our healthcare systems. This would probably require a larger economic effect, or a larger negative economic impact spread across the country, and that's why the government has to start moving faster, I think, as far as mitigating measures are concerned. So, cash transfers, push back in EMI payments, potentially even pushing back tax payments, with the RBI opening up its balance sheet to start supporting the government and the private sector a little bit more, even on a temporary basis, is what is probably required right now. Sort of hemming and hawing around what measures are right, or what will be the ideal measure, I think will only end up significantly increasing the economic impact, because while the cases are rising exponentially, the economic impact also rises in a non-linear fashion. So we need to be very conscious of all the non-linearities that are built into the system in India, being predominantly a gig economy.
Kerry, this is Ashish. Just wanted to add a couple of points here based on what Harsh and Bodhi have talked about. See, the response in India, there are three parts to it, right? So there's a healthcare response. Now, I think some of the commentary which we are seeing in media has been really sensational in terms of especially on the death rates. I mean, of course, there's no doubt that the exponential rise of the cases itself is a given. That cannot be avoided except by social distancing and by taking personal precautions. But on the death rate, I think globally the commentary has been fairly alarmist. Even in Italy, where the death rates are off the charts, like in the 9-10% mortality rate range, even there are some questions being raised on how the deaths are being counted. Like, are they being isolated only for coronavirus, or is it essentially three things, one of which is coronavirus, right? So I think those questions are already being asked, and of course then there's this age difference, etc. in Italy, how the society is composed. I think the commentary in India, like we saw several interviews of Dr. Lakshmi Narayanan yesterday. I mean, the antecedents of individuals who come on media also should be taken into account. I would encourage all the listeners to read a tweet thread by Dr. Vijay Chauthaiwale on Twitter on some of these aspects. I mean, Dr. Chauthaiwale is himself a researcher in the same field, so he understands the topic and the implications of public commentary. So he had a very good Twitter thread on this morning, on Sunday morning, around how some of these experts are kind of playing things in a more sensational and alarmist fashion. So that is one point. To add to what Harsh was saying earlier, see, the response on the financial side has got, I think the response has to account for the fact that we are right now in a cash flow crisis. We are not in an accounting crisis here, right? So nothing has changed fundamentally in the way economy was 15 days ago. So as such, in terms of how you value your assets, or what kind of incentives are given for companies to generally ramp up their operations, I think that has to take a backseat in relation to the more short-term measures and more immediate measures, which have to be cash-driven, because the employers will suddenly face a risk. I mean, even there's a procedural issue here. I mean, who will process the payrolls in the end of March, right? We are like 10 days away from the payroll cycle. Who exactly is going to come to office to process payrolls in organized sector? I think there are issues like that. So the government response has to also, the fiscal response especially, has to also account for the actual practicalities of what's going wrong, and not just a package in a generic sense around saying that, okay, in India will do a X trillion stimulus, which is anyway going to happen and it is needed. But I think what is done for the next 2 weeks is actually more important right now than what's done for the next 2 months.
Yeah. So, Kerry, this is Harsh. I'll come in. I fully agree with Ashish. As I mentioned earlier, also this is very much a cash flow crisis right now. It's not an intrinsic valuation of some kind of crisis. Even if a business can take an accounting hit, what it cannot do is magically take a cash flow hit if it doesn't have cash, right? So the real problem is the cash flow mismatch, and the rest, as Ashish has rightly mentioned, can be sorted out later, which will have to be sorted out later as well. But right now, the cash is the main issue. And realistically, I don't think a lot of companies will actually process I mean, like the formal ones, the bigger formal ones will, but a lot of smaller ones and definitely informal ones will not process payroll at end of this month. Most of them will just delay and defer it. So I think that's one part on the economy, and therefore on the economy we have to go to some kind of cash transfers. Now whether we do it fully, universally, we targeted. The problem with targeting is all these states have different BPL lists, and there was a big problem in the PM Kisan scheme as well. Many states had not come up with their first a small farmer list and then all the farmer lists. So there is an issue. I think on the point of public health, I think some people are raising an interesting issue, which maybe Bodhi, you, Carrie, and Ashish can come in very quickly. Is that they're saying, let us say this problem lasts longer and longer, then the real, statistically, probabilistically, the real victims are the people above the age of 70 or 65, whereas people below the age of 45 are statistically almost unlikely to be harmed. I mean, there might be a few exceptions. So at what point, this is something we don't have to do right now, but at what point do we start saying, well, we have to effectively quarantine all the old people in India within their houses, obviously, having these basic 1, 2, 3 SOP kind of procedures, but the younger people in terms of education and employment have to be out. I don't know where we are at that point, but I think at some point we'll have to consider that because India's median age is 27, I think right now, 27 or 28. So India's demographics, as again Ashish mentioned, very different from Italy or Japan or a large part of Western Europe or East Asia. So that is also something to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, there's a slight complication with that as well. So there are two things, right? So one is obviously deaths lag infections. So, the initial mortality rates that came out right now, I mean, obviously it's significantly, or if not significantly, somewhat increased at this point of time, right? Even the age-wise demographic. And the second thing is, obviously it's not many reports have come out at this point of time to say that it's not a binary situation. You don't fully recover from COVID. Right, there is some long-lasting respiratory impact on people, but yeah, I mean, this is the time for hard calls. I hope that we don't have to get to that, but some of what is happening in Italy, for example, where doctors are having to prioritize people. It's just kind of a terrible situation.
See, I mean, in Italy, the median age of death is 80 to 81, and India's average life expectancy is 70 or 71. Now, that does not mean that there are not 80-year-old people in India. There are in my own family,
no, absolutely.
And I'm sure in many of. But so there is a big difference in that sense. And as Ashish, I think, hinted at it, that perhaps Italy is counting the deaths in a slightly different manner from, say, Germany in terms of, although it's not clear right now, in terms of whether the comorbidities are deaths caused by them are also counted as COVID deaths, whereas in Germany only caused by COVID are called. We don't know that for sure. Yeah. And regarding your point about permanent damage to the lungs, I think that, if I'm not a doctor here, but I think that is only in the cases where you are one of the serious cases who are hospitalized, which overall is around 10 to 15%. So even those numbers will be lower for people who are younger. So that's not for the people, for the mild cases who recover.
Okay. And one of the things that, I don't know if it was Ashish or Harsh, I'm failing to kind of recall that, is the media's role in all of this, right? So we kind of saw this with media initially playing down the whole situation. We saw this with the whole Balaji Srinivasan Recode episode, and now, I mean, you have I don't want to call it sensationalism, because I mean, of course, there is a base level of panic everywhere, but just a quick question, guys, and this is open to any one of you who wants to come in on the role of media in this entire episode. Bodhi, you want to take that?
Yeah, sure. So I, as I've often said on my Twitter timeline that, media sort of suffers from a problem of low IQ leftism. And even here, in some sense, they have, particularly, the star journalist sitting in Delhi, have relied on individuals who have sort of, indulged in more scaremongering rather than giving any practical advice on how do you mitigate some of the negative impact, both from a public health and from a economic perspective. So, to give you an example, we have this guy, Dr. Lakshmi Narayan, being touted as the foremost expert on the whole issue, whereas somebody like, say, Dr. Balram Bhargav, who is the head of the ICMR has not, I'm pretty sure, has not been interviewed by even one person from most of her channels, right? So the media, even though Shekhar Gupta can write that they media, this is the time, this is the biggest story of their lives. What they are doing with it is actually quite appalling, and they have sort of deliberately engaged in fear mongering in some cases, and there's, even though there's, I would say, I would say that things like WhatsApp and all have probably not been very useful in sort of propagating right information, or there's a lot of misinformation out there. But at the same time, the media has effectively not really played a constructive role in the entire thing.
Yeah, that's a fair point, Bodhi. I also believe that this could be an inflection point for healthcare in general, and stemming from this, there will be fundamental changes to healthcare and policy, whether it's the way FDA approves drugs in the US, or welfare schemes like Ayushman Bharat in India, and so on. Ashish, what do you see as some of the changes coming out of this?
Yeah, let's talk about India a little bit. See, the Indian healthcare system is actually a two-tier system where the central government has got certain responsibilities. They look at mostly on the education side and on the policy making side. The state governments are actually the real implementers of how healthcare is administered in the society. It's actually funny because a lot of people don't realize this even now, despite this pandemic. People, not everyone is supposed to go to a AIMS type of an hospital, right? Like there are primary healthcare centers, there are local hospitals, etc. So the role of these different entities is not very, has been in conflict in some cases. It's not been very clear in some cases. I think what will happen is that first of all, the separation of the primary, secondary, and tertiary healthcare is a very critical ask right now in India. People have started going to the specialty hospitals, which is like tertiary healthcare, even for basic requirements like when you have to go to an OPD and so on. So I think that the network of the primary healthcare centers, PHCs, has to really strengthen in India. I think one learning from this pandemic is that since the central government was anyway investing in this wellness centers through the Ayushman Bharat program, where India was supposed to get 150,000 wellness centers. Potentially, the task of running PHCs can still be with the local municipalities, etc. But perhaps the Ayushman Bharat wellness centers can become like the first nodal point of people going and visiting a clinic in their neighborhood. So rather than going to a big hospital or going to a specialist, maybe these centers can become the first point of care. I think that will need policy change as well as how these centers have been conceptualized so far. I mean, we're still in the early stages of the implementation, but in the next 4-5 years, one area of investment for the government could be scaling up these 150 care centers with the capability of at least some advice on stuff like this, if not the actual diagnosis. I mean, potentially actual diagnosis also can come in. Also, the process of how do we involve the private sector potentially can be relooked at by ICMR, like at what stages should they get in, how do you certify test kits, what kind of experiments are needed to certify. So I think some of these changes will certainly happen in the Indian healthcare ecosystem. The states will have to scale up too. I mean, a lot of the healthcare spend in India, while we keep saying that we only spend 1.5% of GDP on healthcare, the fact is that bulk of the spend is actually happening not in the union budget but in the states. So how states run this? There are some good examples. For example, in Assam, Himanta Biswa Sarma has done some good interventions as health minister. So there are enough examples of success. I mean, Karnataka has done some good stuff in telemedicine and so on. So I think some of these policies have to be formalized, and maybe the central government will have to commission research in different aspects in terms of how care is given, how the whole economics is organized, and of course the number of doctors. I mean, we keep debating or talking about this, but the number of healthcare professionals itself is of course a huge concern. So I think all those things will be in question. If not now, then in the next. I mean, of course, this is not the time, but potentially in the next 3 to 6 months, debate, discussions, and research on some of these topics should ensue.
Yeah, just to comment on that, this Bodhi here. So, I think one of the also, it will probably re-emphasize the importance of, the Swachh Bharat Abhiyan that was taken up. So even though, it does not really have anything to do with general cleanliness levels around us, but the message has kind of been driven home in a very nasty way, at least as far as India is concerned. And preventive healthcare services are probably going to see a huge increase in both in terms of focus and mind share, and also spending within the public. I think these particular outcomes will probably have a much more positive long-term effects for us, as far as lifestyle diseases or some of these things are concerned, and it should hopefully lower the death rate and increase the life expectancy over a longer period of time. You will also probably see India starting to think a little bit more closely about what is our what's our preventive healthcare structure looking like, and what is our hardware production capacity, right? So when we talk to friends, we do get a sense that India's capacity to produce is quite high, and with the unraveling of the supply chains, which is going to happen in China, that's a whole topic for a separate podcast on another day. We will see opportunities coming through for India to sort of really improve its healthcare production capacity, both from an IP perspective and also from a manufacturing perspective.
Yeah, I mean, if I look at the last 4 to 5 years, especially, right? I mean, there's been huge efforts to formalize, institutionalize, organize things in India, right? And I saw this tweet. I mean, I can't recall exactly what the tweet was, but it said something around the lines of usually India lives in chaos. So in terms of chaos, we kind of fall in order. So, Harsh, you have any comments on that?
So on the healthcare side, I agree with what Ashish has said, that we'll be probably going towards some kind of NHS model in which the local wellness center becomes the GP, so to speak, even if it's not an MBBS manned or staffed first point of contact before you're referred to something more secondary or tertiary. You could also combine the wellness centers with the ICT, the Anganwadi program. And to Bodhi's point about the Swachh Bharat, absolutely correct, well taken, I would say, which something we discussed in the Uttar Pradesh podcast as well, that we'll have to look at local self-government and local fundraising, especially on the municipal side, because that's where it's going to change. But more broadly on the policy side, I think this is going to have a very lasting change in the way how macroeconomic policy is thought about, and there was a certain build-up even before this whole thing before this pandemic kind of spread. So there's a journalist I follow on Twitter, Claire Lim, and she said, I'm a centrist libertarian most of the time, but and during a time of crisis, you have to be a pragmatic Keynesian or whatever you have to be.
Exactly.
And there were calls before about MMT, these modern monetary theory, and about this, basically printing on tap. We won't go as far as extreme, but the point is, for example, in India, core inflation is low, WPI is low. We are probably running a current account surplus right now. We have a massive spread on the 10Y over other countries. For other countries, spread of 10Y, even though the inflation rate difference is supposed to be only 2 percentage points, and we never bankrupted on our debt. Our foreign holding of debt is low. Our debt to GDP has been following for 5, 10, 15 years. So I think this is definitely, it's such a cliche, but this is definitely one of those inflection points where the government will completely look at what it has been doing macroeconomically, what has worked, what has not worked. And while a large part of the stimulus will be rolled back, some things will permanently change, until the basic underlying core inflation pressures don't build up. So it will be a very, very different world in terms of systemic risks going forward.
Yeah, in a very weird way. I mean, if you look at our focus on current account deficit or controlling inflation, right, it all seems to be like, 4 or 5 years back, we had this idea that something like this will go down, right? And now is the best time to kind of ease on those things, right?
We
go on, Harsh.
No, I was sorry. I was fully agreeing with you that in a way we were lucky that we had a very fiscally conservative government that controlled inflation, and we therefore have some ammunition built up right now to use. Fully agree with you there.
Okay, that's sort of a positive, poignant note to end on. Thank you for everyone who tuned in to listen. I hope you found this interesting. Now, before we leave, I'm going to ask the guys to, basically tell you where you can find them online, and if they have some interesting books or articles or anything that they want to plug. So we'll start with Harsh. Harsh, what do you have coming up?
So my Twitter handle is @Harsh Madhusudan. In terms of books, I'm right now reading State Economy and the Great Divergence. It's a book that compares, why UK industrialized and why China did not. And large part of the argument is because it had state capacity. And I think the key point for our relevant current crisis is that state capacity really, really matters. And that's what India was anyways in the process of building up. But once this crisis subsides, we really, really have to think about it much harder.
Yeah. Bodhi, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. So, guys, you can find me on Bodhisattva. That's spelled BODHISATVAA. It's misspelled version of my name. If I'm not deactivated, you'll find me on that handle. I'm to be honest not reading anything right now, given the fact that I've been completely obsessed with this coronavirus issue. I did read a very lovely book by a guy called Tripur Daman Singh, called 16 Stormy Days. It's about the First Amendment, curbing free speech and property rights in India. Do look it up. It's a quick and a very, very well detailed, well researched book.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Ashish.
Yeah, my Twitter handle is C_Ashish, that's AA. I've been meaning to read this book by Durga Das, which is India from Curzon to Nehru and after, and also Pradeep Bhandari's book on the 2019 election. So hopefully I should complete both of them in the coming week.
Okay, for what it's worth, my Twitter handle is Carry Got the Blues, and it's spelled the way it sounds. Thank you again for tuning in. I hope this was interesting and useful to you. The podcast is going to be available on all platforms, all popular platforms. I feel like we keep adding a couple every week. So it'll be up on Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and of course, Anchor.fm. So until next time, please stay safe and do take care. And remember, don't trust economists with bad math. Jai Hind.